Welcome to the Vision for Life podcast, an ongoing conversation between the pastors of Fellowship Denver and the church at large. Each week, we talk about life, faith, the Bible, and how to follow Jesus as we go about our daily lives. I'm Autumn, host of the Vision for Life podcast. The basis for everything we discuss on this podcast is God's revelation of himself to us. God's revelation surrounds us. His revelation of himself brings wisdom and clarity to those who lack the ability to see. It provides us with a unique spiritual light, which allows us to see things that we couldn't previously, unaided by God's word and by God's spirit. And Hunter's joining me again on the podcast today. Welcome, Hunter.
Autumn, it's great to be here. And our listeners should know we have a cat pillow in the room in which we record this. And it's actually a cat head, to be specific, a cat face pillow. And Autumn is holding it and petting it as we talk.
I do like to hold a pillow. It's a good time. Yeah.
And if it happens to be shaped like a cat, all the better.
All the better. Real cat, holding a real cat, even though I'm not averse to cats, but holding a real cat would make me really sneezy and itchy. And so the cat pillow is preferable.
There you go. Hypoallergenic.
Yeah, hypoallergenic pillow. Also, our environment here in our podcasting studio space has been a construction zone for the last several weeks.
It has been. Jesse, our esteemed producer, has created a more acoustically pleasing room with some very elaborate sound treatments. And so I don't understand how it works, but I'm sure it's going to make this sound a lot better.
Yeah. Hunter's voice is going to sound magical today on the podcast.
That's right. Can you lower my voice a couple of octaves?
Make me maybe just sound like someone else altogether.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Today, we're wrapping up a series of conversations that we've been having on the podcast over the course of several weeks that we've called the Beyond Me story. So we're just going to jump in with this final episode. I had told you, Hunter, earlier this week that I don't know if our listeners will care if we actually wrap up this series of conversations, but for my own sake, I would like to put a bow on it.
And we're gonna put a bow on it like this. We're gonna talk about some simple and meaningful Beyond Me things that we can all do. Mm-hmm. And we want to make this practical and not overly complicated. Simple means not complex. Now, that doesn't mean easy to do. Some of the things we're going to talk about might feel like they stretch us, but they are not rocket science. You don't have to understand the history of how individualism has come to be the reigning ideology of our age. You don't have to be theologically sophisticated. This is just simple things that anybody can do, and they're all meaningful, and they'll make a real difference in other people's lives, beyond you, and I would guess that your own transformation is going to get thrown in the process. Mm-hmm. One of the passages in Scripture that kind of inspired this conversation is really two sections of the Gospel of Mark. In chapter 6, there's the story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, and then in chapter 8, he does it again, except this time it's 4,000. But he's making this point to his disciples where they don't have enough food to feed the crowd. And they're like, what are we going to do? And Jesus takes what little they have, he blesses it, breaks it, and multiplies it, and feeds these 5,000 people. And then they apparently don't learn what that means, so he does it again. And they don't learn what he means. He's like, guys, do you remember when the 5,000, you had leftovers, right? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, and the 4,000, remember that? Yeah, I had leftovers. They're like, yeah. He's like, do you not get it? And and the point seems to be that following Jesus is doing what we cannot do with what we don't have, but bringing him whatever little we do have and trusting him to multiply it. And when we do these simple, meaningful things, that's what we're doing. They're probably going to stretch us. They're probably going to require us to make some space in our lives, in our schedules that cost us something. And it's going to feel both costly, but it's also going to feel like, what good could that do? It's going to feel so simple. And yet, I really do believe these are the kinds of things Jesus takes and multiplies. So that's what we're going to talk about. And we've identified 5 between the two of us. We've identified 5 simple things, and you've got our first one.
We do. These are in no particular order, and I'm sure there are more than 5 examples, but these are the 5 that we're going to discuss and ask you to consider today. So the first simple, meaningful way to step into the Beyond Me story, to just put this into practice, is to develop a friendship that has no apparent win for you. So not a relationship that on face value promises to boost your social status or get you into a Nuggets game, won't give you a place in Breck for the weekend, and can't give you free childcare.
Although I will point out, I've mentored a kid for 15 years, and last month his job gave him tickets to a Nuggets game. He was like, homie, you want to go to a Nuggets game? I was like, awesome, I get a Nuggets game after 15 years.
So sometimes the unexpected will happen.
Sometimes the unexpected will happen.
But this is simply stepping into a friendship, a genuine friendship, with the understanding that within that friendship and relationship, there will still be reciprocity. And so like an eventual Nuggets ticket, that you do believe there is still a way to share in life and to learn from each other and to grow together. But the way in which this will be beneficial for you is not immediately apparent.
They're not a mentor. They are not wealthier than you and, have access to things that you don't have access to. This is a great idea you're proposing. And we have a couple of ministry partners that help people do that. Save Our Youth, which is the organization I just mentioned that I've mentored someone for 15 years. That's the organization that I got connected with him through. Save Our Youth is an example of this. It's mentoring for at-risk youth. And a new ministry partner we're developing is Cross Purpose. They're opening a South Metro location, which we're going to be sharing with our church this summer and this fall. And they have an opportunity to effectively mentor, they call it being an ally, to someone who is going through their career training program. They call their career training participants leaders because they are leading their own growth and transformation. But they have allies who come alongside the leaders and provide life support and conversation and meaningful connection.
So if you hear this suggestion and think, okay, where would I find this person to develop said friendship with? Those are a couple of very clear ways, paths that you can take, organizations that you can learn about and get connected to, who will set you up with this understanding that you are being a friend to this person who you're going to be paired with as an ally or as a mentor. You can also simply do this by just living with your eyes open to the people around you, getting to know your neighbors. If you have a child in school, I think conversations on the playground, on the blacktop when you're picking up your children will often provide opportunities to develop friendships. And as you talk to people, get to know them, you may come to see actual needs in their life, ways that you can be present that might not be immediately apparent.
And people you meet at church. We have a wide variety of people at Fellowship Denver, and you just need to have your eyes open when you talk to people on Sunday through fellowship groups, and there could be an opportunity there as well.
All right, so I took number one. Idea number two. What do you have for us, Hunter?
Well, idea number two is to invite other people into your big life decisions, like should we move to a new place? Where should we live? Should I take a new job, or should I make a change in my career? These are the kinds of decisions that tend to easily get co-opted into the me story. And we've been talking about some of that. We talked about work, and we talked about how we relate to our city. These are the kinds of decisions that easily get co-opted into the me story. And so my suggestion is, when you or when your family is thinking about one of these key transitions, and we all will have them at different points in our lives, when you're thinking about one of these, to invite some other people who would be considered wise, could be friends, could be people who are older than you or more experienced than you, but invite people who would be considered wise into that decision with you, and ask them to help you think about it from a bigger perspective than just, okay, how is this going to serve my best interests? I think this is a really vulnerable thing to do.
So again, not necessarily simple in the sense of easy. This may not be, probably is not an easy thing to do, to share that sort of processing and questioning with someone, but it is an aspect in life in community in the way that it exists within the biblical conception of the Beyond Me story.
I can remember a few years ago, I was making what was going to be, for me, a significant financial decision about a home and where to live. And I didn't have to make a move. I had some things that were driving me to consider that, but it wasn't like a necessity. And so I got together with, asked an older man to lunch who I thought was kind of wise in these matters, and just said, help me evaluate my own processing on this. Mm-hmm. And just to ask that felt really, really risky, mm-hmm. because I'm essentially opening myself up to, he might direct me in a way or give me some things to think about that I honestly don't want to think about, And so it just felt really vulnerable to even just ask for someone's input. And this is a man who I know and trust. It's not like I'm opening myself up to a stranger, but it still felt really vulnerable. And I think individualism really drives us to make these big decisions privately, mm-hmm. and to kind of justify them in our minds without them really being tested by mm-hmm. the wisdom of others. And that doesn't mean that you're going to necessarily make a different decision than you would. In the end, he really helped me, I think, see a bigger picture and to develop a bigger vision for what I was going to be doing. So I appreciated the conversation, and it felt really risky, though. It was simple, but it wasn't easy.
Yes. This is a great way, even just that practice, stepping into that vulnerable practice of inviting people, trusted people into these big decisions, is a way that we can gently start to push back against some of those norms. You mentioned that we often tend to make these decisions privately. I think another cultural tendency that we develop living within our individualistic culture is that when we sense some sort of change is needed, and it may actually be good or needed, but our tendency can be A, to make that decision privately, and B, to just reach for some sort of circumstantial change rather than asking if we've examined really our heart and motives in it and taken time to connect with God in that decision. And so inviting in someone from our community, from the family of God, who also can provide wise counsel, helps us to examine our own heart and motives in a vulnerable way, in a way that is hard, but gently pushes back against that tendency to just reach for circumstantial change.
If I could just summarize what I think you're saying, because I see this happening a lot. We tend to address heart issues with circumstantial adjustments or changes. An example might be our marriage is not the best right now, and we need to do some work on our marriage. Let's move.
Right.
Let's move to a new city, or let's move to a new neighborhood.
Yes.
It's a circumstantial change, but you're still going to bring your marriage to that new city or to that new neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And what would really be good would be to get some counsel and start doing the hard work on your marriage. But it can be the circumstantial things can feel like I'm doing something, I'm making progress, and they do have a short-term benefit.
Yes.
And a short-term, they create a short-term buzz, if you want to use that word, but they don't change anything below the surface. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely.
Or I'm just kind of bored with my life. I'll just change jobs, and really maybe God wants to do something in your own heart and soul to sit with your boredom and to ask deeper questions of you. And it's not just about like, I need to give you some new buzz.
Yes. Yeah. That was a great example. All right, should we move on to number 3?
Number 3, you got it.
All right. So idea number 3, get involved in a ministry simply because there is a need without a clear conception of how stepping into this role will display your gifts or transform you as a person.
We are so good at emphasizing the value of serving in a way that you're gifted to do. I mean, and I believe that. Like that's that's biblical. And as a pastor, I love seeing people's gifts and developing their gifts and calling out their gifts. I love that. That though can get co-opted into the me story where my gifting becomes the excuse not to just stretch myself
Yes.
in a way that I'm, quote, not gifted. And one of the things that I have personally experienced and I've observed in others is God often uses things that I'm not gifted to do, or I don't think I'm gifted to do, to really create good for other people and for a community through me. And I end up growing in the process.
That sense of I'm not gifted in this area, I think the flip side of that is that we may sometimes sense a lack, like a lack of ability or a lack of enthusiasm about wherever the need may be, or the ministry that is asking for help, or the organization that is asking for volunteers. This is actually displaying exactly what the disciples, I think, were feeling in that passage in Mark that you talked about earlier. How can you take something that we don't have and aren't able to give and make something of it? So we have this small bit, this sense of sort of like lack. This is insufficient for what the need is. And yet Jesus did take it and multiplied it through his power.
I bet we could all remember things that we've done, probably as kids, that we weren't good at, and yet doing them was really meaningful for us and might even still be paying off in some ways in our lives to this day. Like growing up, I'm so unathletic. And one of the most fun things I did growing up was play baseball. I did not play baseball well. My last season of baseball, I did not even get a hit. I made contact a couple of times, but they threw me out. And the other times I just walked or struck out. It was miserable. And I also took a ball to the nose and broke my nose and lost a week or so of playing time that way too. So it was a rough year. That's what I'm trying to say. And yet to this day, I love baseball, and I have such great memories of playing baseball. And baseball is a way I connect with people, and it pays all these wonderful dividends in my life. And I just always go back to that as a reminder, like, yeah, you weren't even good at that. And there's something about putting yourself in places that you're not good at, and you feel like I'm in over my head and I don't have what it takes. I'm not gifted for this. And yet God still uses that.
That sounds like commitment. You were talking about experiencing the benefit of committing to something, even if it was difficult, even though you weren't immediately good at it, and putting in continual effort. And then you began to experience the benefit of it.
And you can't say this because you lead the children's ministry, but I can say it. I see people serving in children's ministry who are teaching, and they are having a huge impact on a lot of kids. And some of them would never have imagined themselves as children's classroom teachers.
Most of them.
I see single guys back there, and they're like, "This is not what I thought I was going to be doing." When I moved to the city, but kids are really growing through their presence and through them just making themselves available. So I'm so proud of them.
Yeah, that is a way in which I get to experience and see exactly what we're talking about happen every week. And I see not only actually clear fruit from their investment in the lives of kids and encouragement to parents, but also in their lives. So many of our teachers who would have that exact story, that they signed up either because there was a need, or because they were going to serve with a friend, or because they simply knew they needed to commit to something good. Those are all actual stories of people who are now very faithful teachers. And so they didn't anticipate, actually, and they would say this over and over, but they didn't anticipate the way in which they would change through this process. They knew that it was something good. They knew they were meeting a need. They knew they were investing in lives of kids. But one of our teachers, who now has taught for years, has said that she knows the Bible, the Old Testament particularly, so much more than she would have if she hadn't have taken on that teaching role.
It's a great picture of how when you live the Beyond Me story, you get your own growth thrown in the process.
All right, number 4.
Number 4 is host space for people to connect. And the key word here is host. So I think we often are waiting for someone else to create something for us to come to. Like I'm waiting for someone to invite me out to dinner, or a group of people to get together a hiking trip, to the mountains for the day. Take the initiative instead to be the organizer, to be the host. That could mean opening up your home. That could just mean you're going to put together the thing that everyone's going to go do. And then I would also add to this, as you are hosting, one of the benefits of being the host is you get to also be the inviter. And I would kind of challenge us to invite some people who we wouldn't normally think of as like right in our inner circle. So in this way, you're making some space for people who might need that kind of thing. And you're making some space in your life, in whatever you're doing with your friends, you're making space for them to connect as well.
I think this is that's such a good challenge. And it's a fun undertaking to think about how this could look if you are going to host something with a friend or with your significant other or with your spouse. One of the themes that we talked about during our past conversations was how actually the way we live out those relationships, part of the intent of the Beyond Me story in the relationship of a friendship or a romantic relationship, a relationship with a husband or wife, is to magnify not only God and God's love, that effect, that multiplicative, there we go, there's that word again.
Love that word.
Effect, but to use your relationship to create space for other people to experience healthy relationship and connection.
And you really only need one other person probably in order to just go put something together and go do it, and invite some other people who you see that need that space to go do it. I can remember when I was 15 years old, I moved to a new city and had to get involved in a new high school. And it was like not just a new high school, it was a different culture. It was a Christian high school I went to that I didn't understand any of the subculture of that high school. And my first year there was such a struggle for me socially. I just felt like I don't have friends, and when you're 15 years old, that's a horrible feeling. I don't have friends. I don't know how I fit in here. And somewhere between my first and second year there, I just decided, I don't even know how I decided this, but I just decided I was going to start initiating rather than just waiting for people to invite me to stuff. So I had like one friend who had kind of let me in, and I would just call her and we would put together things for people to go do. We'd be like, today we're going to go do this. And then we call our friends. This was back, you didn't have cell phones. So you had to call people on the telephone and talk to their dad and ask if they could put them on the phone. And then you go, hey, we're going to go do this tonight. And amazingly, what happened is in about 3 or 4 months, I became the de facto social leader of my class. It was a weird experience. I was like, I just went from feeling like a total outsider to everyone is looking to me to set something up for all of us to do tonight. I even got an award for it. So I was just like, that's a fascinating experience. I didn't feel like I had a lot of social capital is the point. I didn't feel like I didn't even know what social capital was. I didn't feel like I had a lot to offer. I was just desperate to have people to do stuff with. I was like, well, if no one's going to invite me, I'm just going to start inviting them. and yeah, it worked.
That was actually that's a funny example, but that consideration actually factored into your question of whether to move that you actually mentioned earlier.
Yeah,
part of your desire was to be able to have space to host people and to create space for people to connect. And so that was part of your decision-making process for whether or not you were going to relocate into a new home.
There's a couple in our church who were telling me last week they're opening up their backyard in the summer every Wednesday night for people to just come over, and they've just got to, they're just inviting people. Come over, stop by if you want to. If you're in town and you're available, stop by. We have the grill going. It's a great idea.
Yeah, there are many examples, I think, of people at Fellowship who I have learned from who do this really well. One of our elders, the Kims, Macy and Eugene. They lived not too far from the church, and they had started this every Halloween. They just are in their front yard and host a neighborhood chili dinner, and anyone and everyone can stop by. They have a huge crowd who pass in and out throughout the whole evening. And so we went a couple of times, and I thought, this seems so odd to say we're serving chili at our house and just sort of throw it out there into the neighborhood, the next doors and the Facebook pages and see what happens. And so we started doing that exact thing in our neighborhood. I was shocked. So many of our neighbors came, and now people stop by and ask if we're going to be the chili house this Halloween.
That's awesome.
And it's because the Kims started doing that.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, our last one is to combine your giving and your serving. And we're leaning into here our First to the Lord season, where we're saying, let's be generous with what God has given us. And we kind of put an emphasis on financial generosity. And now I'm kind of adding to that. When you can combine that with your personal and relational involvement as well, it takes your generosity to a whole nother level, and it takes your contribution and your experience to a whole nother level. So give generously to your church and have an avenue of service in your church. Give generously to ministries that are doing great work in our city, and then go get involved with them. Show up in some significant way and help them with their mission.
Give in a way that requires both a financial investment and an investment of your presence.
That's right. And I think that one kind of captures some of the other things we've been talking about as well. Like, that is a way to often get involved relationally. You'll typically make relationships through serving that you wouldn't have made otherwise, and you'll invest in people's lives who you wouldn't have invested in otherwise. It's a way to serve that requires commitment and isn't necessarily how you're gifted to serve. So I think it layers in a few other things, but the dimension that we're adding here is make it both a financial and a personal presence commitment.
Lean into generosity in both avenues.
That's right.
Well, is that a wrap? Is
this a
wrap on our Beyond Me conversations?
Stick a fork in them.
So go do simple, meaningful things that require you to look for God at work in the world and join with Him in that good work.
And if you do, your life will be about more than just you becoming a better version of yourself. And I really do believe God is going to use these things that we do, these simple, practical steps. He's going to use them to transform us and to transform others too.
Thanks for joining us on the Vision for Life podcast. Thanks to Adam Englund for our theme music, and to our producer, Jesse Cowan.